So as we said, this is going to be a 45-minute group visioning session. And what we're looking for here is, you'll see the right equation for tackling blue-green algae blooms. And I've specified here Northern Ireland's freshwater bodies, but you know, it applies probably across the board. So before we start, I'm going to make an apology, okay, to any mathematicians in the room. The formula you're about to see is for entertainment purposes only. So when I was asked to speak at today's event about this particular topic, it's something that we in the Rivers Trust and also as the Freshwater Task Force, it's something that we've been thinking about for the last couple of years and trying to work out what's causing the problems and more importantly, what are the solutions. And I thought the easiest way for us to do this, we started off thinking of it as a recipe. So it was add a dash of this, put a bit of that, do a bit of that. But we just felt it didn't have the gravitas or the importance. So what we've done is we've come up with an equation. And what we're starting here with is the equation for failure. Okay, so this is what failure looks like. Failure equals nutrient overload plus warm water temperatures, failing septic tanks, wastewater treatment, invasive species, multiplied by inadequate regulation and enforcement, historic underinvestment, lack of public awareness, and delayed response. That is the equation for failure when it comes to the health of fresh water bodies. The result of that failure, as we've all seen, we've seen it in the press, we've seen it in the course of our work, we've seen it right in front of our eyes. The result of the failure of that equation leaves us with catastrophic environmental impacts, a public health crisis, economic loss, destruction of biodiversity, multiplied by the impact on tourism, leisure, sport, and damage to international reputation. And you know, we could probably add another 100 things onto that list, which you will know from personal experience has impacted you, impacted your work, impacted your families, impacted your communities. So we can see when we look at that equation for failure, the outcome of that is not good. And the question that we kind of need to ask ourselves seems pretty obvious. Is this really the vision of the future of Northern Ireland's freshwater bodies that we want? Because as we keep repeating this equation for failure, this is going to be the outcome. And it's attributed to, I think it was Einstein, you know, the definition of madness. I don't think it was actually Einstein did say this, but the definition of madness is to repeat the same actions, but expect a different outcome. So what I'm going to ask all the collective wisdom in the room today is to vision something different. Vision that positive future. What do we want to see? How do we want to react? What actions are we going to put in place to change that equation? So if we break down this equation for failure that's resulting in blue-green algae blooms in Northern Ireland's freshwater bodies and beyond, we're talking about Northern Ireland because that happens to be my area of specialisation, but I know this is across the board. We're hearing more and more from our Rivers Trusts across England. They're unfortunately coming to us as the experts in blue-green algae. This is one thing that Northern Ireland is ahead of the curve on. But if we break this down, what do each of these elements of the equation mean? So if we start with nutrient overload, we can see there, we know what that means. It's excessive phosphorus and nitrogen from agriculture runoff, untreated sewage, industrial discharges, and road runoff. Warm water temperatures, back to what we were talking about this morning in terms of the change in climate, and that's creating the ideal conditions for this growth. Because it takes these elements to come together for these things to happen. Failing domestic septic tanks and wastewater treatment. So in Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland, we have a high level of domestic septic tanks. We found through the studies that have been done into the pollution in Lough Erne that those failing septic tanks are contributing about 12% pollution into Lough Erne. We can only assume that's across the board because we don't have the structures in place to be able to analyse what's happening with those septic tanks. Invasive species, we heard a mention of the zebra mussels in a positive way from Ken, that they were providing housing for a homeless mayfly. But unfortunately, their contribution to freshwater pollution in Northern Ireland, they're disrupting ecosystems, they're filtering large amounts of water, increasing nutrient concentrations, and of course, contributing to the algae blooms. Then we get into the naughty things like inadequate regulation, weak enforcement of environmental laws, insufficient monitoring of water quality. This will be familiar to everyone in this room. Then we look at the historic underinvestment in the water infrastructure in Northern Ireland. This has led to outdated systems that struggle to manage wastewater and protect freshwater resources. It's exacerbating the pollution issues, and it's hindering sustainable water management efforts. Then the next section is probably about what we were talking about earlier in terms of how we're engaging communities, because what we've seen is people do care. We saw that, particularly with what happened around Lough Erne, and we know the blue-green algae has unfortunately made its way to where we are today, into the Erne system. And what we saw was actual genuine concern from people. They were concerned about their own public health, but they were also concerned about the legacy of their nature resources as well. So the lack of public awareness, with limited understanding of the causes and dangers of the blue-green algae by the general public. And finally, in this particular equation, we're looking at delayed response. And again, in this list, I probably could have added another 10 elements in that, but time's against us on this one. So that is the breakdown of the equation for failure. And that's what's contributing to, particularly to the blue-green algae blooms. So what does success look like? What does the equation for success look like to improve and protect our freshwater resources? So if we take the flip of the equation of failure, we'll see that success would look like nutrient management, cooler water temperatures, functional septic tanks and wastewater treatment, control of invasive species, robust regulation, enforcement and strategic investment, public awareness, and rapid response when there is a problem. So again, we've broken this down. We've taken the equation and broken it down on the flip of the things that are causing the problems. Again, we have 8 points on this. So I thought we would have 25 minutes for us to bring our collective wisdom, insight, and experience. And the way we want to kind of do this is, Katie, if you wouldn't mind giving out the response forms, we're going to ask you to work in groups on this, and we'll just take the rows that you're sitting in. If you could designate someone to take notes and a group leader, we have a feedback form on this. You have a number of options. You can either just look at one of the elements, give us your ideas and your thoughts and insights on that, or feel free to do as many or a few as you like on that. Think about the solutions on this. So how do we achieve nutrient management? What do we do about the water temperature? How do we encourage the functioning domestic septic tanks and the wastewater treatments? What do we do about control of invasive species? What about how do we encourage and make sure that there is robust regulation and enforcement? How do we make sure that our states, our governments, our politicians are making those strategic long-term investments, visioning of the kind of future that we all want to see? We need to hold the politicians to account on this. What's our role in making the public aware and empowering the public and empowering communities, as we heard about before? And what about your ideas for rapid response on this? So what I'm going to ask you to do is, in the next 25 minutes, solve all the problems that I've just outlined. I'm joking. In the next 25 minutes, if you could work with your colleagues and your friends that we have here today and have a chat about either each of all of the points or just pick one of them. And then at the end, we'll get a bit of feedback from the audience, and again, we'll collect in the response forms and start putting these together with some ideas. Yes, and also for our people who have joined us online, you can also contribute to this discussion by filling in your thoughts and ideas on Slido, just following through on the questions. So you can drop your ideas into Slido here. So I'm actually going to start with some feedback that we had online. And you can see some of the comments that we have here, tying in policy, looking at government funding, grant mechanisms, pointing out the fact that the money for these interventions come from a government level, central and local, and what's needed with our commentator here. Thank you to everyone online who has also contributed, because I know it's probably quite difficult, or more difficult when you're sitting there at home trying to do this or on your computer. But we've had some great response online, and I hope we're going to get some great response in the room. But they're talking about here conveying the benefits of doing things differently. And we didn't get a chance to move on to this in our discussion this morning in terms of moving things from business as usual to a different model in terms of how we do business. So again, our contributor here is conveying the benefits of doing things differently in language. It's more likely to adjust the agenda of the politicians, and that's what's needed for sustainable lakes and fresh waters. So I'm going to go through each of the groups, and if you could decide one point that you would like to share with the rest of us, and we'll start with this group over here.
Hi, so the first thing obviously was a lot of them kind of intermingled with each other, so obviously it was investment in infrastructure was key for us, especially around water management and water treatment works, and probably the publicity around septic tanks. Obviously the population in Lough Erne, like all of Ireland, is quite spread out and a lot of septic tanks, but a lot of people don't realise they get that clean once a year, so they probably work from NI Water to probably better publicise that, and maybe bringing in a licence and where if you're getting planning permission, you have to go to service every so often, so maybe having a body like Corgi, like the cash register, to kind of do stuff like that. So yeah.
Great. Yep. And in fact, in Ireland, there's a model for doing that, where the septic tank issue, it's taken very seriously. You have to register your septic tank. It's inspected. But on the flip side of that, you can apply for a grant if you do find a problem with it. And I know with some of the feedback with the work that we've been doing, people with domestic septic tanks, sometimes they don't even know they have one. They have a fear of it. They don't know how it works. They don't want to go near it because it's so expensive to repair it. And it's very often one of those hidden sources of pollution. So that's a great one to pick up on.
Sorry, I've done a lot of work on septic tanks for about 5 years, and there's a lot of misinformation about them, but we won't go into that now. But what we do in Lough Erne catchment is when there's a new development, they have to assess the amount of extra phosphorus they're bringing into the catchment, and they have to upgrade someone else's sewage system in order to get the planning permission, and that's been in place for 20 years.
I'll come back to you for tactics on that, Linda. Follow up on that.
Yeah, the mighty one again. I suppose one of the things we were looking at was nutrient management. So farmers, as we've obviously discussed quite frequently today, is that they want to do the good things. They don't always want to be the butt of the blame for everything. So, but they need education and they need advice, and all of those systems that were put in place whenever the SAFO regulations, etc., came in have all kind of dwindled out. So there needs to be a lot more investment and incentivising farmers to change, and then also we need an independent environment agency separate to DERA.
Yes, there's been certain pressures on that now. We do have the environmental improvement plan published on Friday evening. I haven't had a chance to have a look at that, but no doubt there'll be some treats in there for us.
You've just taken our idea, really. We kind of said exactly the same thing, in that it feels like we need a really long-term plan, and at the moment how the government is kind of the 4-year cycles and the changing in government, it's just everything is so short-term. So is there a way that we can have an independent environmental protection agency that is not linked to the government, that can set up the long-term plans to try and put things in place and keep the funding going, basically?
Great contribution, thank you.
Well, this group at the back here is known as the A team. We've also had some of our ideas already spoken, but there was one that we came up with which is worth considering. There was a view that over the top of an independent NIEA and the EPA in the Republic, that there ought to be an overseeing body that's all island. that can oversee the lot. Over in England, there's the OEP, Office of Environmental Protection, just been formed. It's only about 12 people, but they supervise Natural England and the Environment Agency. And it's a little early days yet, but it might work.
Yes, so we also have here the that group is also formed in Northern Ireland, slightly behind the curve because we didn't have the assembly, so they're a bit behind in the work, and they had a recent consultation.
Yeah, the thinking behind the All Ireland was that water has no frontiers, so it moves around. Yeah.
Yes, and also the fact of the being, a distinct biogeographical region. So the All Ireland policies for things like invasive species and water quality is certainly something that I think would bring a positive element to that.
Thanks. We were looking at your equation and trying to find if there was one piece maybe that, to focus on one piece that would have the biggest change in the cascade effect for others. Something that came out in all of our queries was the enforcement and regulation, because if that's done effectively, a point that came up in all of our responses around our group here was there may be conflicting policies in different directions through different departments in government. However, environmental protection legislation and water quality legislation is robust enough to affect change if it was implemented correctly. And the existing legislation is a strong piece that requires the enforcement, the regulation, to see some of the stuff. It doesn't actually need a lot of new anything if we were doing what exists already properly.
Absolutely agree with you. You can have a book of laws and regulations, but if the facilities are not there to enforce them, whether that's the enforcement teams or the ability to take them right through to the courts, and again, in Northern Ireland specifically, we have a legacy of kind of poor regulation and poor enforcement on that, but you're right, there's no point adding more checks and balances if there's nobody enforcing.
I think absolutely. I think it's fair to say that the point I'm trying to make is not to point a finger at one person who isn't doing their personal job properly. What I'm trying to say is there's reasons why the regulation isn't happening, and there's symptomatic reasons as well as fundamental reasons.
Thank you very much. Who's that?
Okay, I'll try to explain it. Okay, the first point was the land management. Really, most of the problems come back to land management. So, because everything that's happening to our rivers and our lakes comes from land management. So, when there are problems, we need to be much more stronger to penalize the problems and highlight them. And at the end of the day, sorry, that's just little notes. At the end of the day, it's always the taxpayer that will pay for any problems. So the more we are aware of the problems with the land management, so this is not the farmers, and everyone needs to be involved in this. So the more we can enforce the law that are already in existence. And coming back to the septic tank business, it's we all have septic tanks if we live in the countryside, and we need to be really careful what we use. So again, it's back to education. What can people use in their own little life, in their own household, how not to contribute to further pollution of our environment. So, thank you.
Yes, you raise a really important point on that, and something we touched about when we discussed communities, that in a complex situation, I think it's only human nature to reach for the simple explanation, and very often that's about identifying when it's somebody else's problem and kind of pointing the finger. But what I'm picking up from what you're saying is that what we need to embed is that it's everybody's responsibility. We've all kind of actions around that we can take.
Even the supermarkets, once they start, showing us which products are good or bad for our environment. I know the symbols are already on the packages, but most consumers will not read those packages very carefully. So if we highlight that more, it's a bit like, when you buy food, you already have the thing, what's allergy causing. So if we get the producers of these products to highlight more what's less phosphate for our environment. That's just another point that we can push on.
And that's a great way of empowering consumers as well to make good decisions when it comes to the impact of their actions. And we'll just finish up with this group. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, so being the last, obviously a lot of things have been raised already, but I think probably what's different about our discussion was that community and local policy planning needs to be better integrated into catchment management. And if you stop the average person on the street and ask them what's important in their life, they'll probably say health and education rather than water quality. So we need to be encouraging the integration of water management as a foundation stone into all of those things that really do matter to the public as a means of trying to deliver on those. And there were some useful models talked about here in the Netherlands, where people in the Netherlands basically vote on where public investment is going to be undertaken, and then hold politicians to account on the outcomes of those investments. And also in Ireland, the example of the citizens' assemblies informing how things can be done differently. So I think that's maybe slightly different to the other points.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, if we care about it, the politicians have to care about it. If we become interested and vocal about it, then the politicians will follow. And my experience with these things tends to be individuals and communities are always well ahead of politicians. So it's up to us to lead the way on that. Don't forget, they work for us. So we need to tell them what we want them to do in terms of work for us. So we've had some really great suggestions there. We're going to gather all these together and again, to feedback on this, to draw on your experience and your thoughts. So we've had some ideas for switching this equation round. And that would be the result. If we were able to change this equation, this is our vision for the future. If we were to flip that round, we could have thriving ecosystems, improved public health, balanced economic growth, biodiversity increase and preservation, boost to tourism, enhanced international reputation, safe, healthy, clean water, valued and enjoyed by all. Anybody want to put their hand up that doesn't want that in the room? Oh, would have to ask you to leave. So you can see, you know, this is the vision. This is the equation. We have this within our gift to turn this round. We need support. We need political support. We need financial support. We need determination. We need vision. We need to bring communities with us. And that's what failure versus success looks like. With all the ideas that you're putting in, we want to switch these round and move from failure to success. This is the model that we need to find. And hopefully some of the ideas that we've come through, not just today, but over the course of the event, will help us and motivate us and give us the tools and ideas and ways to think about this so that we can turn this round. And that's what it would deliver. We'd swap from having the catastrophic environmental impact to thriving ecosystems. We wouldn't have public health crisis, we'd have improved public health. Economic loss, we could change it for balanced economic growth, biodiversity, boost to tourism, international reputation, and as I say, the goal that whether it's rivers, and obviously I'm slightly biased coming from the Rivers Trust, I have nothing against lochs and lakes, but I'm just talking about the kind of freshwater environment in general. That's the vision that everybody in this room shares, and in fact everybody within our community shares this. So the will is there. What we need to do is find the way. And when you look at this sort of vision, the question is, isn't this worth getting our sums right for? So that's why we need to find these right equations and these right solutions. So thank you very much for your time and your participation and your great ideas.